We're here in the break room / kitchen at News Channel 5. Heather's going to help us out with a simple demonstration because so many of you have asked, how can the snow stick to the ground because the ground's been so warm?
Right. Everybody's wondering. Right. It's too warm. The snow's not going to stick, but it will. And I'm going to show you why using a clogged sink of all things, right? So snow is going to overcome a warm ground on two different ways. Either the air cools quick enough and cools down things like your car, your back patio. The snow is going to stick to those things first. However, roads hold on to that heat a little bit longer, and it takes longer for them to cool down. Snow can actually overcome that if you have heavy snowfall rates. Just like the amount of water getting into the kitchen sink, it's still draining, but the amount of water coming in is exceeding how fast the sink can actually drain that water. Same thing with snow tonight. We're looking at snowfall rates of upwards of 1 inch or more per hour, and that can exceed the rate at which that snow can melt once it touches the ground, Rory. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. Very simple way. All right, we're going to be right back.
You know, with this heat that we've been experiencing, many of us have been dreaming of being on an island, toes in the sand. But actually, Nashville is an island. Can you explain this urban heat island effect?
It's the island we don't want to be on.
Exactly.
It's not Gilligan's. Yeah, so an urban heat island is a metropolitan area, a city that tends to get much hotter than the outlying areas because of all the concrete, right? The density of the buildings. And with Nashville being a city on the rise, full of cranes, our heat has increased pretty significantly downtown as well. If you take a look at our summertime top temperatures from 1970 to 2020, we've actually risen by as much as 2.8 degrees. It's a pretty significant warming trend. Like I said, looking at those afternoon highs, we've seen it warm steadily over the last 50 years. Now, part of what makes Tennessee so beautiful is the topography, right? It's the greenery, and that is part of the reason why the heat is not equally distributed across our area. The greenery of the rolling hills, the bluffs, the mountains, and of course our waterways, our numerous lakes, rivers, and waterfalls all help. The greenery in these outlying areas isn't just beautiful, it's helpful. Critically helpful when it comes to reducing periods of extreme heat, and that's because these areas don't trap nearly as much heat as our urban city centers do. And that's because the structures within our downtown areas, like our buildings and our roads, they absorb and they re-emit the sun's heat much more efficiently than natural landscapes do. And so the temperature differences between neighborhoods outside the city versus inside the city can be as much as 15 to 20 degrees. So that means areas outside the city could have a high of 80 to 85, but areas within the city center could be as hot as 95 to 100 degrees. And of course, with heat being the #1 weather killer in the U.S., it's so critically important that we work to understand these heat inequities downtown so that we can implement strategies to help reduce the impacts of the extreme heat.
We want people to be safe, and this is part of it.
Right. And so there's a really exciting project that's going to be happening next month, specifically to map out and find some of these hot spots in downtown Nashville. Tomorrow night, Henry Rothenberg is going to take a deep dive and explain it to us. It's really cool.
I like this little science lesson and news, and something that can benefit all of us.
Yeah, and folks can get involved in.
Okay, thank you, Bree. Now, like Bree said, heat kills more people every year than any other weather event. We really want you to hear that tonight. 12,000 Americans die every year because of this. More than 80% of those deaths are people over the age of 60. Their bodies are not able to sense heat or sweat as well as younger folks, and dehydration and heat can stress their bodies more easily. We remind you all the time when it gets this hot, please check on your neighbor, especially if they're older. Make sure that they have air conditioning to go into, that they are staying cool, and of course drinking plenty of water.
50 years of my stuff, everything is gone.
Hundreds of people lose everything they own.
And our town in Waverly has been devastated. And those are the things that I can't imagine.
More than 20 people have lost their lives. Others remain unaccounted for.
There's just so many people missing right now. We don't, it's hard to have hope.
Hope, though, is something many are clinging on to as people come together to help one another after tragedy.
The outpour of love, the outpour of helping us what our needs are, it's coming in.
This is News Channel 5 at 10.
Good evening. A record 17 inches of rain falling in Middle Tennessee Saturday morning, causing deadly flooding. Now, more than 48 hours later, 12 people remain missing. Governor Bill Lee has asked the federal government to expedite a major disaster declaration for the area. The flooding impacted Humphreys, Houston, Dixon, and Hickman counties. TEMA and FEMA have been on the ground assessing the damage, the first step to determine if the areas will qualify for federal aid. And in the devastation of the deadly flooding, there were signs of hope, including one from above. We begin our team coverage tonight with News Channel 5's Jason Lamb. He talked with a man who, in a desperate situation, took risks to rescue several people stranded on their roofs. Remarkable. Jason, thank you. This, by the way, is not only the deadliest flooding event in Middle Tennessee's history, but it is also the deadliest flooding event this year in the entire country. All right, Storm 5 meteorologist Henry Rothenberg is here with a more in-depth look at what's a really alarming stat.
Very alarming stat, Rory. Record rainfall for the state from this at over 17 inches, as Rory mentioned, shattering the old record of 13 inches. And across the country in 2021, we have seen 36 flood-related fatalities. That does not include Tennessee. Tennessee alone, 30 flood-related fatalities, with 22 of them coming from this event alone. And sadly, that number could climb as more of the missing are found.
It's been a little more than a year since a deadly tornado hit Middle Tennessee. But for many of us, when we think of Tornado Alley, we think of the Midwest. But did you know the Southeast is more at risk for deadly tornadoes than anywhere in the country? Storm 5 meteorologist Heather Mathis looks at why the South is more vulnerable and how the risk is increasing.
2020 was not a good year for tornadoes in the South. In total, more than 70 people lost their lives. 27 of those deaths happened right here in Tennessee.
Tennessee is a very active state for tornadoes.
Chrissy Hurley with the Nashville National Weather Service says a number of factors put Tennessee in the Southeast at a greater risk for tornado damage and deaths.
So if you've ever driven across Oklahoma, Kansas, it's very rural. You could drive for 30 minutes and not run across one person. But here in Tennessee, you know, it takes a lot of effort to drive for that long to not run into somebody.
A denser population, even more trees in our landscape, mean tornadoes have more to destroy.
And so when those tornadoes, even the small ones, touch down, we're more likely than not going to see some type of damage.
Southern states also have more people living in mobile homes, and that adds a greater risk in severe weather.
It's one of the worst places you can be.
Storms are also very common here at night when most people are sleeping.
Tennessee is the #1 state for nighttime tornadoes, and we're the #1 state for nighttime tornado fatalities. So it's ever more important to have multiple ways to have warning notifications that will wake you up, so that way you can seek shelter immediately.
As more people move to the volunteer state,
the more vulnerable things are going to be. With an influx of people comes likely an influx of damage, tornado reports as well.
In Nashville, Heather Mathis, News Channel 5.
This is really interesting. When it comes to the number of tornadoes that happened in 2020, we saw the majority of them in the Southeast. Bria's back here. Yeah. We actually doubled the Midwest.
Which I think is a big shock to a lot of folks when you really look at the numbers from this. Classic Tornado Alley is the Plain States, right? It's the Dakotas down to Texas. And I think most people think that that's where the bulk of our tornadoes happen. But that's not the case. Take a look at the numbers. Last year, the majority of the Plain States had around 20 to 30 confirmed tornadoes. Texas, much higher. It's also got a larger square footage. Well, now look at the Southeast. The Southeast has long been considered a secondary tornado alley, and the word secondary, I think, can lead folks to thinking that it's less than. But when you look at the numbers, they're not. 50, 75 confirmed tornadoes in Georgia last year, over 100 in Mississippi, and here in Tennessee, we had nearly 40 on the ground. So if you add that all up, across the Southeast last year, we had 590 confirmed tornadoes. Now compare that back to the Plains, the classic tornado alley, they had 238. So when you compare the Plains to the Southeast, 71% of the tornadoes happened in our area. 28% happened across the central part. And as Heather was telling you, it's not just the population density and the topography that has increased our risk for deadly and damaging tornadoes. It's also the frequency. Where we're at this year, that trend continues. So far, the Southeast has had over 300 tornadoes this year. The plains haven't touched the 200 mark. So we continue to lead the country in tornado frequency. That's why it's so important to have a way to be prepared. So we've put together a section on our website at newschannel5.com/prepare. Tons of resources there to help you and your family to make a plan so that you can be well prepared the next time severe weather threatens. Carrie?
Thank you, Bree. And part of being prepared is having multiple ways to get weather alerts. One of the best ways is to have the Storm Shield app right on your phone. As long as you have push alerts enabled, you will know about any watches and warnings in your area. If you don't have it, take a few seconds right now, grab your phone and download it in your app store so that you are prepared.